Dru Sjodin was born September 26, 1981, in Minneapolis, Minnesota. She was the younger of two children to her parents Alan and Linda. When Dru was 3 years old, her parents divorced but kept their friendship. From age 10, she and her brother Sven were raised by Linda and her second husband, Sid Walker, a travel agent in a comfortable home on Whitefish Lake, renowned as one of Minnesota's most scenic vacation spots. Dru blossomed in high school, becoming an honor student, joining the golf team, and getting elected homecoming queen in 1999. But her real passion was for art. Her room at home was filled with her sketches of rock stars, models, and her friends. After graduating from high school, she went to the University of North Dakota Grand Forks, a city of about 50,000 people. Friends described Dru as a person in love with life and ready to lend a helping hand to everyone. She often traveled around the country, but her dream was to visit Australia, and Dru was going to go there in the spring of 2004. In preparation for the event, to save up more money, Dru worked 2 jobs in her spare time: a sales associate at Victoria's Secret and a waitress at a nightclub in Grand Forks. On Saturday, November 22, 2003, Dru's shift at the Victoria's Secret store, located in Columbia Mall, ended at 4 p.m. Later that day, she was supposed to work at a nightclub. Before leaving the mall, Dru decided to go shopping and bought a purse from a certain store. She called her boyfriend, Chris Lane, as she made her way to her car in the parking lot. Suddenly, after Dru said, "Okay, okay," the call was disconnected, but Chris didn't give it much thought. There was nothing important they were discussing, and so he didn't call back. About 3 hours later, Chris's phone rang again, and it was Dru calling. When he answered it, all he heard was a noise, like the sound of the wind and the sound of buttons being pressed on the phone. 3 weeks later, in an interview on a television station, Chris recounted the thoughts that flashed through his mind when his conversation with Dru was interrupted. "I did not know the sense of urgency of this phone call at the time," he said. "I never in a million years dreamt that this was happening. There was no sense of urgency, more just a cell phone call being cut off for any number of reasons. Honestly, I had no idea that this terrible thing was happening." Dru was living in a college dorm where she shared a room with a friend named Meg Murphy. About the same time Chris received a strange phone call, Meg received a call from the nightclub where they were trying to find out why Dru hadn't come to work and wasn't answering the phone. She was a responsible employee and always came to work early, so her absence immediately caused everyone's concern. However, Meg didn't know where Dru might be, and was surprised that she hadn't shown up for work. Trying to find out where her friend Meg had disappeared, she first called mutual acquaintances, and then called the local hospital, where she was told that Dru had not been admitted there. Around 9 p.m., unable to find out anything, Meg called the police. Knowing that Dru worked at Columbia Mall, a police officer was dispatched there. At this point, the mall was already closed. Driving around the parking lot, the officer saw Dru's car. Upon examining it, he found that the car was unlocked. There were no signs of a struggle or any other crime. A black nylon sheath from a folding knife was found on the ground near the car. It wasn't clear yet whether it had anything to do with Dru's disappearance, but such a find was not encouraging. On the seat in the car were papers, a wallet, and a new purse purchased that day, suggesting that even if Dru had faced some dirty deed, it certainly hadn't been a robbery. Neither friends, boyfriend, nor parents knew where Dru might be, so investigators began to lean toward the theory that they were dealing with a kidnapping. First of all, detectives checked out Chris Lang. He was almost immediately ruled out as a suspect because he was in Minnesota, 300 miles from Grand Forks. From Chris, the police learned about the 2 phone calls Dru had made, that one had been abruptly interrupted, and that during the second, made a few hours later, wind noises and the sound of button pressing could be heard. The next day, when the mall where Dru worked opened, the detectives arrived there to review the security camera footage. As it turned out, there were no security cameras in the parking lot where the missing girl's car was parked, but fortunately, there were quite a few security cameras inside the mall. Going through the footage, detectives found a moment when Dru went into one of the local stores after work, where she bought herself a purse. She was calm and in no hurry to go anywhere. She was wearing a pink sweater and was holding a jacket. At 4:55 p.m., Dru paid for her purchase at the register, then put on her jacket and left the store. On her way out, she called Chris. The call was made at exactly 5 p.m., and as we now know, at 5:04 p.m., the conversation between Dru and Chris was abruptly interrupted after she said, "Okay, okay." Knowing that the call was interrupted after 4 minutes, one of the detectives decided to conduct an experiment. Setting the timer for 4 minutes, he began walking slowly from the store where Dru had bought her purse to the parking lot where her car was parked. When the alarm sounded indicating that 4 minutes had passed, the detective was in the parking lot near where the car had been found. This indicated that something had happened while Dru was at her car. However, as mentioned earlier, there were no cameras overlooking the parking lot, and that made it difficult to investigate. Dru's disappearance attracted media attention, and as a result, a huge number of people learned about what had happened to her, many of whom decided not to remain indifferent to someone else's misfortune. In addition to police officers, over 1,000 volunteers participated in the search for Dru. FBI officers also joined the investigation. The last call that was made from Dru's phone was traced to the small town of Fisher in neighboring Minnesota, which is only a 30-minute drive from the mall where she worked. As you can see on the map, the area around these two towns is occupied by fields. Police used helicopters, all-terrain vehicles, horses, and dogs to explore these fields. The landowners were asked to check their properties themselves, but unfortunately this was inconclusive, and at first, no leads could be found. The search radius increased with each new day, and 4 days later, an ominous discovery was made. A boot was found under a bridge in the town of Crookston. A roommate noted that on the day of her disappearance, Dru had left the house wearing those boots. Later, the fact that the shoe belonged to the missing girl was confirmed by forensics. Crookston is a small town of less than 10,000 people. It is located about 30 miles from Grand Forks, where Dru disappeared from. Further searches in the Crookston area yielded no results, as there was nothing of investigative interest to be found. A reward of $20,000 was initially offered for information that would help to determine Dru's whereabouts, and then the reward was increased to $140,000. At this point, the only clue that could lead to Dru was the surveillance footage at Columbia Mall. The detectives again sat down to watch hundreds of hours of footage from various cameras, but this time they decided to focus their attention not on Dru. They speculated that whoever abducted her may have been following her and may also have been on the videos. The investigators spent hours at the monitors before they saw the person who had caught their attention. They noticed a man walking aimlessly around the mall. He was not buying anything and seemed to be looking more at the people around him than at the merchandise being sold. At 3:41 p.m., he sat down on a bench near the mall exit and continued to watch people casually walk past him. After about 10 minutes, he got up from the bench and, wearing black gloves on his hands, walked out into the lobby, where there was a camera hanging overhead, into which he looked. This shot was taken 72 minutes before Dru's conversation with her boyfriend was interrupted, and she disappeared. After watching the man get up from his seat and walk away, investigators noticed that he only did so when a blonde woman walked past him, carrying a grocery cart heading in the direction of the parking lot. Detectives did not consider this a coincidence. Rather, in their opinion, the man seemed to have chosen a suitable victim and followed her. The identity of this woman was unknown, but police were aware that only one person, Dru Sjodin, had disappeared from the mall parking lot that day. Given the slight resemblance between Dru and the woman this suspicious man was following, it has been suggested that he had a particular image of the victim. If the kidnapper really was this man, and if for some reason he had failed to kidnap this woman, his next target might have been Dru. She had left the mall around 5 p.m., a time when it was already dark, which might have played into the hands of the perpetrator. At this point in the investigation, there were 3 cities in the case: Grand Forks, where Dru was kidnapped; Fisher, where her phone was last active; and Crookston, where the shoe was found. With this data in mind, the FBI began checking the files of all registered sex offenders from these cities and their environs. Comparing the photos from the files with the image of the suspicious man from the mall, there was only one man who matched all the parameters, and that was Alfonso Rodriguez Jr., who had an extensive criminal history of repeated crimes against women. The 50-year-old man had spent the last 23 years behind bars. Rodriguez was the second oldest of 5 children born in Laredo, Texas in February 1953, to migrant workers Dolores and Alfonso Rodriguez Sr. Alfonso Rodriguez Jr. claimed to have had an unhappy childhood, describing his home life as unpleasant because his parents were highly critical of him and unreasonable in their demands. His family moved from state to state for 15 years until they finally settled in Crookston in 1963. Rodriguez became increasingly isolated while growing up, which was further compounded by language barriers. His preferred language was Spanish, and he struggled with English, which made school especially challenging. He eventually dropped out of school during the 9th grade and began working as a laborer at the American Crystal Sugar Company plant in Crookston. Rodriguez claimed that he was molested by older women during his youth, which he said was the source of his hostile feelings against women. In October 1974, at the age of 21, he asked a woman for a ride home, but instead directed her to the driveway in Crookston, where he grabbed her by the throat and tried to force her to please him. The next month, he approached another woman who was sitting in a truck outside of a Crookston movie theater. He threatened her with a knife and ordered her to a secluded spot in the countryside where he forced her to have intercourse with him. Then, in 1979, he tried to kidnap a 69-year-old high school English teacher while she was out walking one night in Crookston. The woman fought back as Rodriguez tried to force her into his car. In a fit of anger, he stabbed her with a knife in her elbow and abdomen, yet she managed to break free and run to safety. The woman, who was artistically talented, was able to draw a composite sketch of Rodriguez that closely resembled him and led to his capture. He was convicted of attempted kidnapping and aggravated assault and sent to prison for 23 years until his release in May 2003. He had been released from prison 6 months before Dru disappeared and was registered as a sex offender of the highest 3rd degree, which meant that his risk of reoffending was as high as possible. Before his release from prison, Rodriguez's family voiced their concerns to Minnesota Department of Corrections officials. Even his family feared that he was going back to his old ways. But despite their fears, Alfonso was released because he had served his entire sentence. After his release, Rodriguez lived with his mother in Crookston, just a couple of miles from the bridge where, it should be recalled, Dru's shoe had been found, which was another factor not in his favor. The detectives decided to talk to Alfonso Rodriguez, and of course, he denied any involvement in Dru's disappearance. The man confirmed that he had been at the Columbia Mall the day she disappeared, saying that he had gone to the movie theater and watched the movie Once Upon a Time in Mexico. What he didn't consider was that none of the movie theaters in Grand Forks were showing the movie that day. Police searched Rodriguez's car and realized with regret that Dru was probably no longer alive. It looks at this time like there's no chance we're going to find Dru alive, Grand Forks County Sheriff Dan Hill told reporters. I believe that it is more of a recovery than a rescue mission at this point in time. In Rodriguez's car, dark red dried stains were found in several places in the interior, which forensics later determined were drops of Dru's blood. The affidavit says blood was found on the passenger side rear window and in the back seat, as well as 2 other areas in the passenger compartment. The blood did come back. It was a DNA match with Dru from the DNA taken from Dru's toothbrush, the sheriff said. A folding knife was found in the trunk, which matched the sheath found in the parking lot next to Dru's car. A receipt was also found indicating that Rodriguez had purchased this knife, complete with its sheath, from a hardware store located several hundred yards from the parking lot where Dru disappeared. Although Dru was not found alive or dead, investigators gathered enough evidence to charge Rodriguez. 8 days after she disappeared, on December 1, 2003, the man was arrested. Rodriguez, who was imprisoned in a Grand Forks jail, claimed that he was not involved in Dru's disappearance and refused to speak to law enforcement officials or provide information as to her whereabouts despite the evidence against him. During a brief bond hearing several days earlier, bail for Rodriguez's release was set at a staggering $5 million. While he remained silent in custody, the search for Dru continued unabated and focused around these three towns. The work of the searchers was made more difficult by the snow that covered the area abundantly. In an unprecedented move, the governors of North Dakota and Minnesota pledged during a December 9th press conference to aid in the search for Dru by employing several hundred members of the National Guard and other state employees. North Dakota Governor John Hoeven said that Dru's disappearance was something that has touched every North Dakotan. Minnesota Governor Tim Pawlenty told reporters that he was very proud of the cooperation and the collaboration that's been exhibited by members of the community and police officials. Despite all the efforts made, there were no results, and due to worsening weather conditions, the authorities decided to suspend the search operation. In spring, the intensive search continued. Those searching for Dru hoped they would be able to find her, as the winter snow had just begun to melt. After 5 long months of searching, they were eager to return Dru home. Finally, on April 17, 2004, Dru's body was found. It lay in a field in Crookston, just a few miles from the bridge under which the boot had been found. Dru's family was overwhelmed with grief upon hearing of the heart-wrenching discovery. Her father told reporters, "We were waiting for that call, and when that call came, we all stopped living for a second. It was her parents' worst nightmare, and one that would haunt them for the rest of their lives." The field where the body was found had already been searched, but apparently because of the large drifts, they could not find it immediately. Dru was naked below the waist, which made the motive of the crime obvious. Her hands were tied behind her back, and there was a rope around her neck and a cut. Under the rope were the remnants of a plastic bag, indicating that the bag had first been put over Dru's head and then tied around her neck with a rope. Hair matching Rodriguez's DNA was found on Dru's jacket. Before she died, the young woman had been brutally beaten and stabbed repeatedly. The medical examiner listed 3 possible causes of her death. It was either the cut on her neck, suffocation, or the third possible cause, which was hypothermia. On April 24, 2004, after many months without a word, Dru's family was able to say goodbye to her. About 1,500 people attended the mourning ceremony. North Dakota, where Dru was kidnapped, abolished the death penalty back in 1975. Minnesota, where the body was found, did not use the death penalty as a punishment either. However, because Dru had been transported across state lines, the crime was considered a federal crime, and therefore the prosecutor's office had the right to seek the death penalty for Rodriguez. On August 30, 2006, Alfonso Rodriguez Jr. was convicted in the Dru Sjodin case. The jury recommended that he be sentenced to death. On February 8, 2007, Judge Ralph Erickson, during the hearing, told the unconfessing Rodriguez that his senseless and violent actions caused the jury in the court to make a difficult decision. Alfonso Rodriguez Jr. became the first person sentenced to death in the state of North Dakota in nearly a century. After 6 years on death row, on June 28, 2013, Rodriguez confessed that he was the one who kidnapped and took Dru's life. However, the story doesn't end there. Ralph Erickson, who had previously been the district judge who sentenced Rodriguez to death, became a U.S. Court of Appeals judge, and it was he who in 2021 overturned his own conviction of Rodriguez and ordered a new sentencing phase. Rodriguez's guilt is not in doubt and has been confirmed by various types of DNA testing. In this case, it is the death penalty that is at issue. Erickson overturned the death sentence, citing, among other things, the failure of defense attorneys to properly examine Rodriguez's mental health and the testimony of forensic expert Michael McGee, which the judge himself said misled him. This is the expert's testimony, which stated at the time that Rodriguez violated Dru's sexual integrity within 24 to 36 hours of the abduction. The fact is that there was no direct evidence to support this, such as Rodriguez's seminal fluid on Dru's body. According to the judge, the expert gave his opinion, but it was not supported by the facts, which misled the judge and influenced his verdict. Still, in reversing the death sentence, Erickson noted that even without the presence of Rodriguez's seminal fluid, the circumstances in which Dru's body was found, naked below the waist with her hands tied behind her back, were indicative of a sexually motivated crime. Judge Erickson said that the failure to examine Rodriguez's mental health, both generally and at the time of his crime, was a violation of his constitutional rights. After Rodriguez's death sentence was overturned, the federal prosecutor's office issued a statement saying they would seek the death penalty for him again. However, 2 years later, in 2023, the prosecutors abandoned those plans and accepted that Alfonso Rodriguez's death sentence was commuted to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. A statement to that effect was issued, which said, "The United States of America, by Max Schneider, United States Attorney for the District of North Dakota, hereby withdraws the notice of intent to seek a sentence of death against defendant Alfonso Rodriguez Jr., filed on October 28, 2004, Schneider wrote in a March 14 court filing. The United States no longer intends to seek the death penalty in this case. My thoughts today are with Dru Sjodin's family, particularly her parents, Linda Walker and Alan Shoden," said Schneider. "They are genuinely good people and loving parents who, in the wake of an unimaginable loss, have worked closely with our office for nearly 20 years. We continue to wish them the greatest measure of peace possible. I also want to commend the trial team, including former United States Attorney Dru Wrigley, as well as our office's appellate attorneys and support staff. Over the last 2 decades, they have continuously upheld the high standards of the Department of Justice through their work on this tragic case. As a result of their efforts, Mr. Rodriguez is and will remain a convicted murderer. The directive to withdraw the death notice has changed how the United States Attorney's Office will proceed with this case. What will not change is that Mr. Rodriguez will draw his last breath in a federal prison. This case led to changes in sex offender registration laws. On July 27, 2006, President George Bush signed the Adam Walsh Child Protection and Safety Act, which included Dru's Law. Dru's Law changed the name of the National Sex Offender Public Registry to the Dru Sjodin National Sex Offender Public website, which provides information to the public on the whereabouts of registered sex offenders, regardless of state, territory, or tribal boundaries. On June 22, 2013, news broke that Alfonso Rodriguez had been transferred from death row prison in Terre Haute, Indiana, to Coleman II, a high-security penitentiary in Sumterville, Florida. This is where it looks like he will spend his last days. The events discussed in this video took place in 2007 in the state of Kansas, and although 16 years have passed since then, this high-profile case has yet to come to a conclusion. On January 5, 2007, 19-year-old Jody Sanderholm, who lived with her parents in Arkansas City, went to a dance rehearsal that was held at the college where she was attending. On that day, Jody did not return home and stopped answering her phone. Such behavior was unusual for her, so her parents immediately became concerned and decided to file a missing persons report with the police. Jody Leanne Sanderholm was born September 26, 1987 in Arkansas City to Brian and Cindy Sanderholm. She was the third child of her parents. She had a brother called Jason and a sister called Jennifer. From a young age, Jody was fond of dancing, and although it played a large role in Jody's life, she also did not neglect her studies. She was one of 4 valedictorians in her graduating class. While in high school, Jody was a member of the National Honor Society, a Kansas State Scholar, a Kansas Board of Regents Scholar, and earned the Outstanding Physics Student of the Year award presented by David Steinemetzy. She was a member of the Ark City High School dance team for 4 years. 2 of those 4 years, she was the captain. Jodi was a member instructor of Arc City Dance and a Universal Dance Association instructor. After high school, she attended Cowley College, where she studied pre-pharmacy. While at Cowley, she was a member of the Cowley Tigerette dance line. In 2007, the population of Arkansas City was about 12,000. Jodi's parents, like probably other locals, thought it was a good and relatively safe place to live and raise children. However, after Jodi disappeared and the details of what happened to her became known, many began to realize that safety was only an illusion and that the man was the most dangerous beast. On the morning of January 5, 2007, Jodi drove her car, a Dodge Stratus, to college for a dance rehearsal that was scheduled to end at 10:45. After the rehearsal, she intended to return home. Cindy called her daughter's cell phone several times, but she didn't answer, which was highly unusual. Jodi always kept in touch with her family, and even if she missed a call, she would call back soon. Cindy had a bad feeling about this. She decided to get off work and go home to see if Jodi was all right. When she arrived, she immediately noticed that her daughter's car was not in front of the house, and this only increased her anxiety, because Cindy knew that by this time, Jodi should have been back from rehearsal. Upon entering the house and looking around, Cindy realized that Jodi had not returned home. Her dance uniform, which she put in the washing machine when she returned from rehearsal, was not there or in the hamper for her dirty clothes. The shower stall was dry, although Jodi always showered after dance class. It soon became clear that Jodi had no contact with her father or older sister Jennifer either. She had an appointment at noon, to which she never showed up. Cindy and Brian began calling their daughter's friends, hoping to find out where she might be. But after the morning rehearsal ended and Jodi left college, none of her friends saw her. That evening, the college dance team was scheduled to perform at a basketball game, with a routine of which Jodi was the choreographer. She wouldn't have missed it of her own free will, but she didn't show up either. At about 6 p.m., still unable to learn anything and without waiting for their daughter to return home, Cindy and Brian contacted the police and reported her missing. Officers from the sheriff's office immediately put together flyers depicting and describing Jodi, began to inquire about her last known whereabouts, and put out an APB on the vehicle she was traveling in. The police learned from Cindy and Brian that Jodi had a boyfriend she had been dating since high school. His name was Colby Wilson. When contacted by phone, he reported that he had been at his brother's house in Texas for several days. The police quickly ruled him out as a potential suspect because his stay in another state was confirmed. The next day, January 6th, was very eventful. Lori Leglighter, Jodi's best friend with whom they had been friends in dance since high school, provided the police with important information. They both enrolled at Cowley College, where they went on to study dance. Lori reported that she left work at Sirloin Stockade in Arkansas City around 10 p.m., Tuesday, January 2nd, and noticed a light blue car drive by the restaurant several times as she left. On her way home, she noticed a car following her in her rearview mirror. "I thought something strange was going on," Lori told the detectives. She decided to see if the car behind her was really following her, so she started turning onto different streets. The driver of the car behind her was doing the same thing, and it really scared Lori. She drove to the local police station and parked next to it, thinking that the stalker would leave her alone. She didn't see him after she stopped, so she drove home again. However, she had to go back to the parking lot near the police station because she saw the car chasing her again. Lori sat in the car for a while before driving home. She told the detectives that she didn't go to the station because she thought it was someone else's stupid prank, but that wasn't really all. On Friday, January 5th, the band Tigerette Dance Line was rehearsing at the college. According to Lori, she and Jodi got there around the same time and, as usual, parked not far from each other. Lori spotted the light blue car again. What's more, she recognized the man behind the wheel. It was a local resident, 23-year-old Justin Thurber. Lori did not know him personally, but had seen him several times in the company of his older brother and his friends. Lori and Jodi left practice at the same time and were supposed to meet up later, but Jodi never showed up for that meeting. Soon, several members of the dance team revealed that they too had seen Justin near the college during the past week. He always sat in his car in the parking lot and just watched. Within the first 24 hours of Jodi's disappearance, police had driven all over the city, but could not find her car. Arkansas City is surrounded by fields and wooded areas. They brought in a fixed-wing aircraft to search the area from the air. The car was more difficult to hide than a person because of its size, so the police hoped to be able to see Jodi's car from the air. It was determined that the last time her cell phone signal was received, it was from a cell tower located near the Kaw Wildlife Area. This is a vast, wooded area along the Arkansas River. At this point in the investigation, only one person, Justin Eugene Thurber, who was identified by Lori Leglider and other members of the dance group, was considered as a person who might be involved in the disappearance of Jodi Sanderholm. It is important to note here that despite his young age, Thurber was well known to the police. 3 years earlier, in 2004, he had been charged with illegal possession of banned substances. He eventually received a suspended sentence and was released. 3 months after that, he was arrested for theft and probation violation. In October 2005, he was charged with disorderly conduct. 3 months later, he was arrested for petty theft and again found to be in possession of a controlled substance. On December 31, 2006, which was just 6 days before Jodi disappeared, Thurber was arrested again for theft. That same day, after paying a $3,000 bail, he was free. Having had a merry New Year's Eve, the next day, January 1st, he began impersonating a police officer and disrupting public order. When the real cops came for him, Thurber complained of chest pain and was taken to the hospital instead of the station. Why he was not arrested after his discharge from the hospital remains unclear, nor is it quite clear why he managed to get away with it all the time. A relative of his who works for the Cowley County Police may have contributed to this, but that's only a guess. That same day, January 6th, a police officer saw Thurber's car, a light blue Cadillac, parked outside his parents' house and decided to talk to him. His father invited the officer into the house. When the police officer asked Justin where he had been yesterday, he said he had driven his car to Winfield, a town about 13 miles outside of Arkansas City, in the morning. There, according to Justin, he met up with his friend and 2 of his friend's buddies, whom he did not personally know very well. Next, the 4 of them began driving around the countryside in a car belonging to one of his friend's buddies until the car got stuck on a dirt road near Cedar Vale. Then, as Thurber claimed, he walked toward Arkansas City, which is about 30 miles from Cedar Vale. After 6 hours, he got tired of walking and called his father to pick him up. Thurber's father confirmed what he said, saying he picked Justin up wet and dirty, a couple of miles from Cowley State Fishing Lake. Justin also told the police officer that his car, which he left in Winfield, had been returned by friends. The story wasn't very convincing, but there was nothing to charge Thurber with yet, so the officer left. That same evening, officers spoke with Alexis Swartzel, who recently ended a 3-year relationship with Thurber. She told officers Thurber often took her to the Kaw Wildlife Area, southeast of Arkansas City, and she pointed out places she and Thurber would visit. When the police informed Alexis that they were investigating the disappearance of Jodi Sanderholm, she was very surprised and said that Justin had once said that he had begun watching Jodi when he was 13 years old. He would peep at her when she was swimming in the pool in her backyard, and sometimes in the evenings, peek through the window in her room and wait for her to start changing clothes. Police asked Alexis about her reasons for breaking up with Thurber, to which she said she had broken up with him because he was too abusive and had strange tendencies that were becoming more and more frequent. On several occasions, she said, during intimacy, he would choke her unconscious. On top of that, he asked her to fight him because he could not get aroused any other way. It was becoming more and more obvious to the police by the minute that Justin Thurber might be involved in Jodi's disappearance. The police had no evidence to link him to the girl's disappearance. But late in the evening of January 6th, Thurber was arrested anyway. Detective Eric Mata arrested Thurber on bail revocation and suspicion of criminal trespass because the investigation into Jodi Sanderholm's disappearance revealed that Thurber was on the college campus, where the detective believed Thurber should not be. Thurber told Mata that he wanted to talk to his lawyer. At the same time, police officers arrived at Justin's parents' house with a search warrant. The officers took the shoes Justin had been wearing the day before when his father picked him up. The shoes were wet and were drying on a towel. Thurber's father told police he helped his son clean the mud off the shoes. The clothes Justin was wearing when his father picked him up were also recovered, but by this time he had had time to wash them. The next day, January 7th, searchers trained to identify human activity in rugged terrain set to work in the Kaw wildlife area. They found shoe prints that matched Justin Thurber's, as well as several other smaller shoe prints. As darkness fell, they decided to continue the search the next day. On the way home, some searchers drove past Cowley County State Fishing Lake and decided to stop because they heard Thurber was wet when his father picked him up. They discovered a muddy tire track, muddy shoe prints near a public restroom, mail addressed to Jody Sanderholm's parents in a chemical toilet, dance shoes in another toilet, and a flip-flop sandal. Investigators later retrieved cut-off sweatshorts, a wallet containing Jody Sanderholm's driver's license and social security card, her black leotard, a tigerette jacket with Jody Sanderholm's first name on the front, a vehicle floor mat, and a car seat cushion. The sandal matched the impressions found at the Kaw wildlife area. Searchers spent the next 2 days around Cowley County State Fishing Lake and the Kaw wildlife area. On January 9th, specialists with sonar brought in to survey the bottom of the lake discovered Jody's sunken car. On the same day, the hope of the Sanderholm family also died. Jody's naked body was found under a pile of leaves, logs, and twigs at the Kaw wildlife area. Authorities found DNA evidence linking Justin Thurber to both Jody's car and her body. The car had been in the lake for more than 3 days, so police feared that the water that filled the interior had destroyed all evidence. That was partly true. Forensics spent a great many hours before they found a short hair in the interior. Carrie Melton, director of the Forensic DNA Testing Lab, ran mitochondrial DNA tests on the hair found on the driver's seat of Jody Sanderholm's car and concluded that it was almost certainly Justin Thurber's hair. Barbara Leal, an employee of a private DNA testing company, tested samples taken from Jody Sanderholm's right biceps and right side of her chest. She concluded that Thurber could not have been excluded as a participant, although 99% of the population could have been excluded. Cell tower data showed that on the day Jody disappeared, her phone and Justin Thurber's phone were in the same areas at the same time. Lori Leglider, Jody's best friend, said she saw Thurber in the college parking lot the day she disappeared. When the police looked at the camera footage provided by the college administration, they were convinced that Lori was telling the truth. Thurber was in the college parking lot at the same time rehearsal was going on, and he left that parking lot at the same time as Jody. The tape showed that Thurber followed Jody in his light blue Cadillac. Based on the fact that letters addressed to Jody's parents were found near the lake, investigators speculated that Thurber had followed Jody from the college to her home, and when she got out to retrieve the letters from the mailbox, he attacked her, pushed her into her own car, and drove her away. That theory was confirmed when a shoe print identical to the sole of Justin Thurber's sneakers was found next to the Sanderholm family mailbox. As previously mentioned, footprints of Thurber's shoes and smaller shoe impressions were found at the Kaw wildlife area. It was determined that these were the footprints of Jody's shoes found at the fishing lake along with her other belongings. Thurber's footprints and Jody's footprints in the preserve were located side by side. Walking along them, at one point the searchers saw that Jody's footprints were interrupted and Justin's footprints went deep into the woods. This meant that he was carrying the girl further on his own. His shoe prints were also found where the body had been found. All 3 of the people Justin said he had been with the day of Jody's disappearance denied what he said. They had not seen Thurber that day, which meant his story about the car being stuck near Cedar Vale was a fabrication. The 3 officers drove Thurber to Cedar Vale so he could show them where he said he was. Thurber was unable to determine where he said the car was stuck. Back at the police station, Thurber volunteered to take a polygraph test. He also requested that his relative Chad Monroe, who worked for the Cowley County Sheriff's Office, be present during the questioning. The evidence found was sufficient to indict Justin Thurber. He himself denied guilt, and the judge set his bail at $1 million. Thurber's attorneys tried to convince the court that he was mentally retarded and incompetent, but were unable to do so. Thurber had graduated from high school and even attended college for some time, so the judge found the defense claim of his mental retardation unproven. The medical examiner who conducted the autopsy testified at the trial. He said that the first time he looked at the body, he had no doubt that the last hours of Jodi's life were very painful. Her entire body and face were covered with bruises and abrasions. There were clear signs of strangulation on her neck. It was strangulation that was named as the cause of death of Jodi Sanderholm. I can't say all the information about what the medical examiner found during the autopsy. Not all horror movie maniacs are as brutal as Thurber was to Jodi. Without going into detail, and at the same time to give you some idea of what happened at the Kaw Wildlife Area, I will say the following. The crime was motivated by carnal desire, and Thurber committed the crime with a stick. At trial, in addition to Thurber's ex-girlfriend, 6 other women testified, each claiming that the defendant stalked her. One of them was a co-worker of his. In one case, she even had to call the police to have an officer walk her to her car after work. It was already dark, and she was afraid to go to the parking lot because she saw Justin waiting for her. Earlier, he had left a rose and a note under the windshield wiper of her car, saying he liked her and wanted to get to know her better. Several witnesses said they saw Jodi Sanderholm's car on January 5, 2007. Kari Morris, a friend of Jodi's, noticed that Jodi was sitting in the passenger seat as their cars passed each other in Arkansas City shortly after noon. Morris reported that the man behind the wheel of Jodi's car appeared to be a large man. She called Jodi's cell phone, but received no answer. 2 other women reported seeing a vehicle that looked like Jodi Sanderholm's car while driving on a dirt road south of Arkansas City around 3 p.m. One of them said the driver was Thurber and identified him in court. On February 17, 2009, the jury reached a unanimous verdict, finding Thurber guilty on all counts and recommending that he be sentenced to death. Realizing what sentence the judge would hand down, Thurber tried to negotiate a plea bargain. His lawyer told the prosecutor that Justin would plead guilty if he were not given the capital punishment. Jodi's family opposed such a deal. The presiding judge took the jury's decision into consideration and sentenced Thurber to death by lethal injection in March 2009. In 2008, the state of Kansas signed the Jodi Act, which, among other things, expands police authority over stalking suspects and expands the list of actions that can be considered stalking. Since the sentencing, Justin Thurber has not abandoned his attempts to appeal the court's decision. His attorneys are trying to prove that Thurber is mentally retarded. In 2018, the Kansas Supreme Court postponed Thurber's death sentence, citing a Supreme Court of the United States ruling that the execution of defendants, even those with mild developmental disabilities, is unconstitutional. The Sanderholm family said a competency hearing was held during the original trial, and Thurber was found to be fully competent at the time. Jodi's mother, Cindy Sanderholm, sat in the courtroom 11 years after her daughter's passing. She said that Thurber had written letters to other girls while in prison, and this should show that he was competent. "That's sick. It's just sick," Cindy said. "It tells you that he is competent enough to reach out to people and write letters. He knows what he is doing. I'm sure Jodi, pleaded for her life, and he didn't give it to her. She didn't get a second choice. She didn't get a second chance," she added. In August 2021, the Kansas Supreme Court issued an opinion announcing that a state law passed in 2020 allows Thurber, who is appealing a death sentence, to seek appointment by the Cowley County District Court of an attorney to assist in post-conviction DNA testing. Thus, even 16 years after Jodi Sanderholm's passing, the final word in this case has yet to be spoken. It should also be noted that no one has been executed since Kansas reinstated the death penalty in 1994. The last time anyone was executed in Kansas was in 1965. Since then, besides Thurber, 9 other people have been sentenced to death, but no sentence has been carried out. We haven't executed anyone in that time frame, and there's no timetable to have any other future executions, said Adam Pfannenstiel, the communications spokesperson for Kansas Department of Corrections. I think it's a little shocking that Kansas reinstated the death penalty over 20 years ago, and there's not a plan yet, said Jennifer Aldridge, Jody's older sister. I thought this would have been something that would have been discussed 20 years ago when it was reinstated. Therefore, even if Thurber's death sentence is upheld, there is a good chance that it will never be carried out. 39-year-old Justin Thurber remains at the maximum security El Dorado Correctional Facility in Butler County, Kansas. According to a Kansas Legislative Post Audit Committee report published in 2014, each of the inmates serving time in administrative segregation at El Dorado comes with an annual cost of nearly $49,000. Further, it is not only the cost to house an inmate sentenced to death. Taxpayers also pay nearly 4 times the price to prosecute a case where the death penalty, if pursued by the prosecution, $395,000 per case, compared to only $100,000 per case when the death penalty is not sought. For the Sander homes, taxes are added insult to an unbearable injury and a grueling wait for justice in the case of their daughter, Jody. It hurts me so bad every week when I see my paycheck, and I know I'm paying tax money to feed him, said Brian Sanderholm. Death is what he deserves, and that's what the law stated, said Cindy Sanderholm. So, we need to get the law fixed so we can use it. If it was your daughter, your son, it was our daughter, what would you want to have happen? Asked Brian Sanderholm. Most regrettably, Cynthia Ann Sanderholm, Jody's mother, passed away on December 2, 2022, at the age of 63. This is a story of survival that is hard to put into words. The bravery of 8-year-old Jennifer Sjodin is beyond measure, and her actions in critical circumstances are remarkable. It's a rare case where the victim aided in apprehending her attacker. Despite losing her ability to speak due to a horrific injury, Jennifer survived, retaining every detail. Over 19 years, she relentlessly continued to pursue her own case, and in the end, she got her way. Yes. No. Jennifer Sjodin, an 8-year-old schoolgirl, had recently finished school. She lived with her single mother, Elaine, who did everything possible to ensure her daughter's happiness and well-being. Elaine worked multiple jobs to support the family and provide Jennifer with a joyful childhood. Surrounded by such love and care, Jennifer blossomed into a lively and cheerful child, embracing learning with enthusiasm and displaying a keen intellect and curiosity. At such a young age, children are often afraid of the dark, and Jennifer was no exception. She had a fear of the dark and frequently slept alongside her mother in the same room. As far as I can remember back in my childhood, I just didn't like the dark or sleeping alone. So I found comfort in going to bed with my mom. We would all bed we had with each other. That night, on August 9, 2009, the mother and daughter slept in the same room. Jennifer was tossing and turning, kicking her mom in sleep, making it difficult for her to fall asleep. Unusually, at 2:30 a.m., Elaine woke up and asked Jennifer to go back to her own room for the rest of the night because she needed to get up early for work. Understandingly, Jennifer responded to her mother saying, "Just because I love you, Mom, I'm going to sleep in my own room tonight," and went to her room. Elaine would later regret this decision for a long time, but at that moment, she couldn't know what would happen next. The following morning, Elaine discovered that Jennifer was missing when she went to wake her up. She noticed that the window facing the parking lot was wide open. Elaine promptly called 911. Upon the police's arrival, She recounted that she hadn't heard any noise or screams after Jennifer went to her room. It is worth mentioning that their apartment was on the first floor, and the windows in Jennifer's room overlooked the parking lot, leading Elaine to fear that someone might have seen Jennifer and entered the room through the window. Elaine realized that their apartment was not the ideal living situation for her and her young daughter, but it was the best they could afford at the time. Nevertheless, Elaine's parents decided to help her and their granddaughter with a new place to live. They purchased a small house nearby and renovated it. Jennifer and her mother were supposed to move there in a few months, and they had been there the day before Jennifer went missing. They were working in the garden, where Jennifer was bitten by mosquitoes, which prevented her from sleeping peacefully that night. After her daughter's disappearance, Elaine was devastated. She said that Jennifer was all she had and pleaded for her return. The police worked tirelessly to locate her. Luckily, Elaine didn't have to wait long for news. Around 6:30 p.m. that same day, the police received a call from parents whose children were playing in a field and accidentally stumbled upon something. To their horror, they realized it was the body of a young girl. Upon arriving at the scene, the police found the body of 8-year-old Jennifer Sjodin lying in the middle of the field, 5 kilometers from her home. Jennifer's condition was grave, but she was still breathing. Jennifer's condition was grave. Her throat had been cut from ear to ear. The main life-threatening injury for Jennifer was a wide wound on her throat, which caused her to lose a lot of blood and made her extremely pale and weak. Jennifer was taken to the hospital in critical condition, where doctors fought to save her life. When I first saw Jennifer in the emergency room, she was a fairly small 8-year-old, very pale, covered with ant bites and scratches on her back. She couldn't make any sounds because of the injury that she had to her neck. Fortunately, after the operation, Jennifer's condition stabilized and the bleeding stopped. We completed her surgery. Her airway is stable. She's not bleeding. So we're very hopeful about her survival. When she regained consciousness after the surgery, her behavior underwent a sudden change. It turned out that she was afraid of all men. I was kind of a hard patient to deal with because I had a lot of nail doctors and I was scared of males. Additionally, the Dickinson Police Department deployed a whole team to guard her hospital room. Throughout this time, Jennifer was in a constant state of panic. She even hit a doctor in the stomach when he tried to approach her. Elaine tried to reassure her daughter, explaining that all these people were there to care for her and help her. However, Jennifer didn't trust anyone. Her behavior became more understandable when she finally revealed what had happened to her that night. We knew that we had a survivor that couldn't speak. The challenges were to extract information from her. Now we're talking about an 8-year-old. It was difficult. Jennifer could not directly inform the investigator of anything. To obtain any information, the detectives gave her a notebook and several pens, asking her to answer questions in writing. Due to her fear of men, Jennifer wrote notes to her mother, who then passed them to the officer. Jennifer's responses were surprisingly precise, detailing the events accurately. Despite being only 8 years old, she displayed remarkable intelligence for her age. She started by going into her room, turning on the light, and picking up a book to read, hoping it would help her sleep, which it did. Jennifer fell asleep. The next thing she knew, a stranger was carrying her out of the house. He was running with me, hearing me down the sidewalk, and I immediately tried to scream that he covered my nose and mouth. Afterward, he placed Jennifer in the car, claiming to be an undercover police officer. She later confessed that she immediately felt that something was wrong. Looking around, she saw her mother's car in the parking lot, so she was confused about where they were going and why. On the one hand, she knew that the police were good guys, but on the other hand, her mother had taught her not to trust strangers. As a child, I wanted to believe him, but The part of me that had just learned about strangers in school. The part of me that was scared of the dark knew that there was something really wrong here. As they passed her grandparents' house, Jennifer told the stranger that he could drop her off at their house, to which he replied, "I can't because they're not home." And then she realized he was lying because their car was in the driveway. Later, the man stopped near Jennifer's school, about 3 kilometers from her home. He then said to watch the moon carefully. When it changed color, her mother would come for her. I remember anxiously waiting for the headlights, but they never came. I think that at that point he was trying to psych himself up for what he really intended to do. 5 minutes passed, and the stranger said, "Well, your mom's not coming, so we need to go further." They drove a few more blocks to a dead-end street where the strangers stopped the car. Jennifer tried once again to make sure he was a real policeman. I was interrogating him. I was wanting him to print to me that he was a police officer. I wanted to know, where's your gun, where's your badge? He told me once parked that his gun was in the back seat. Jennifer turned around to search for it, and at that moment, the suspicious policeman took off her underwear. Jennifer is unsure of how long she was in the stranger's grip because she blacked out. She first regained consciousness when he was dragging her through the field by her ankles. Despite the excruciating pain from twigs and stones digging into her back, Jennifer pretended to be dead and stayed silent, realizing this was her chance to survive. He let go of her feet and left her in the field. Jennifer only heard him walking away. Then she heard his car door slam and him drive away. I realized I couldn't scream, and I couldn't figure out why. I had just enough strength to throw my right hand on top of my neck, and that's when I felt this gaping wound. And I looked at my hand, and I was full of glad. Since the exact time of Jennifer's disappearance is unknown, it is believed that she lay in the field for 12 to 14 hours. When the sun set, she saw the lights of passing cars. Nearby, she heard children's voices, and a dog approached her several times, as if trying to get the attention of its owner, but he never came. Throughout, she was bitten by fire ants, which helped her stay conscious. Anytime I would come to, I would be in disbelief that I hadn't died yet. Jennifer said she wasn't afraid and had even accepted that she might not survive, but suddenly she heard children's voices nearby, and at that moment, something hit her leg. The next time Jennifer regained consciousness, she heard a police officer repeating, "You've been found, you're gonna be okay, just please stay with me, please stay with me." And I remember being put into the life flight helicopter. This story was very challenging for young Jennifer, as she couldn't speak and had to write everything down on paper. Moreover, her fear of men complicated the situation, so her mother asked all the questions, and Jennifer's answers were relayed to the officers who were behind the door. Incredibly, 8-year-old Jennifer even managed to get the stranger's name from him. I just remembering his name, and so I wrote, he said his name was Dennis. I remember then that he looked griefy and like he may have had a scar or something on his face. 4 days after her disappearance, the police requested the services of forensic artist Lois Gibson, who communicated with Jennifer solely through gestures and notes. Despite these challenges, they managed to create an incredibly detailed composite sketch. It was shown to the public in hopes that someone would identify the man. Meanwhile, the police continued to comb through the crime scene and found Jennifer's clothing about half a mile away, along with a man's shirt and underwear. Although there was hope that DNA on the clothing would lead to the perpetrator, no matches were found. Jennifer's recovery was gradual. She showed remarkable resilience despite still being a child. There was a moment when she got upset over a chocolate bar she couldn't eat, screamed in frustration, and a faint sound escaped her mouth. Doctors were shocked because her vocal cords were almost severed, and they never expected them to heal, but somehow they began to mend.
I like to see how to set up then.
Soon after, Jennifer was discharged from the hospital. She not only returned home, but also went back to school. After completing her schooling and college education, Jennifer decided to pursue a career as a children's librarian. However, she never forgot what happened that night. Each day felt like a hunt for the criminal.
It could be anyone. This could be our neighbor. This could be someone at the post office, someone at the grocery store. If he watching enough, is he going to come back and finish me off?
Fortunately, Jennifer met a guy named Jonathan, and for the first time in many years, she trusted a man and they fell in love. However, at the same time, the trail of her attacker grew colder. The chances of him being found were slim, and the case showed no progress despite being passed from one investigator to another. "18 years after that dreadful night, Jennifer received a phone call.
I got a phone call that Detective Tim Cromie would be taking over my case and he wanted to meet with me.
Tim Cromie promised to do everything possible to catch the criminal, and Jennifer believed him.
And I told her, I said, Jennifer, I will do whatever I can do in my power till the end of my career to get you the answers that you need for this case.
Tim decided to bring in FBI Special Agent Richard Renison to the case. Richard had previously worked for the Dickinson, Texas police before joining the FBI. Tim and Richard discovered the significant amount of evidence collected on the day Jennifer went missing and immediately after she was found, with Jennifer's underwear being particularly crucial, as well as the perpetrator's shirt and underwear. They sent a DNA sample found on the clothing to Quantico, Virginia. Although detectives knew that technology had advanced significantly in 19 years, they understood that the case's age meant it would not be a priority in the lab.
Often working cold cases, time is your enemy. People forget, people move away, people die. This was one of the benefits of time in our case, was the advances of technology in the DNA field.
Despite a whole year passing, their work was rewarded. The man whose DNA was found at the crime scene was Dennis Earl Bradford.
Who is that?
The same man Jennifer had written down many years ago. It turned out that the 8-year-old girl had been incredibly accurate in her descriptions.
Jennifer was 8 years old, on pain medication, couldn't speak, and hand wrote down, he said his name was Dennis. At that point, it was monumental that this girl was so accurate. Of course, later we found out how accurate she was on everything.
Dennis Bradford, 39, lived in North Little Rock, Arkansas, and his DNA was logged into the national database following an assault on a woman he met at a bar in 1996. Although sentenced to 12 years in prison, he only served 4. On February 4, 2000, Dennis was conditionally released. Less than a year later, police arrested Bradford for driving under the influence less than half a mile from his home. He remarried and worked as a welder until his arrest in 2009. Tim Cromie and Richard Renison investigated the link between the suspect from North Little Rock, Arkansas, and the small town of Dickinson, Texas. It turned out that the man had been arrested in Dickinson in 1987, 3 years before Jennifer's attack. At that time, he had 2 addresses within 2 miles of Jennifer and Elaine's apartment. To confirm his identity as the kidnapper, detectives requested a 19-year-old photo from his driver's license. When they saw the picture, they were stunned. He looked like a copy of the composite sketch created with the help of 8-year-old Jennifer.
You're a canker for Shoden.
Yes.
You're out because you got in contact with her.
Yes.
Told about it.
No.
I didn't tell her. Obviously, it's special up, but I think you would. If you will see her out to you need to and pray her. I really did.
I said to because who are for freedom and conscience. Oh, good. You remember? Yeah. Oh, well, well, yeah, don't let you go for it. I have great there. Oh, Harley, or cars. Yeah. Bye. No idea. You want me back 2 days while you're already. Yeah, and yours to not.
Dennis Earl Bradford was arrested on October 19, 2009. He insisted he didn't know Jennifer, couldn't recall why he had stopped near her apartment, and couldn't comprehend why he had treated her so cruelly. Dennis also revealed an interesting detail that investigators didn't know. After the attack, he was overwhelmed with guilt, and he attempted suicide with a shotgun. Bradford wanted to pull the trigger but changed his mind. Afterward, he was admitted to the psychiatric ward, which happened to be the same hospital that Jennifer was still in. Even at that time, he was so close to her. Immediately after the interrogation, detectives informed Jennifer that the criminal they had been searching for 19 years was arrested. When they called me that morning and told me that they really arrested this person, Dennis Earl Bradford, it was the most surreal moment of my life. Meant everything to me. Later, Jennifer Schuett expressed her gratitude to the detectives for fulfilling their promise.
Above all, I'd like to thank the detectives Jenny Conley, but the Dickinson Police Department, her special agent, Richard Renison with the FBI. For all their hard work and dedication over the last year and a half. As far as Hollis from day one, never giving us all my faith. And bringing in my life, you create my determination.
She also admitted her anticipation of facing Dennis Bradford in the courtroom. Since Bradford was willing to plead guilty and not drag out the trial, Jennifer was given the opportunity to select a court date. She chose August 10, the 20th anniversary of the attack. I remember staying up late, endless nights, trying to perfect my victim impact statement, writing and erasing and writing again and erasing again, just trying to perfect what I wanted to say. I had 19 years worth of things to say to this person. However, it was not meant to happen. On May 10, 2010, a few months before the trial, Dennis hung himself in his jail cell. Feeling that her right to see the case through to the end had been taken away, Jennifer went to Dennis's grave and read aloud what she wanted to say in court. Dennis Bradford, you chose the wrong little 45-pound, 8-year-old girl to try and hurt her, because for 19 years, I've thought of you every single day and helped in searching for you. In my heart, I knew you were out there. And now I know, listening to my heart all of these years and never giving up on finding you, I was right. After finishing her speech, Jennifer turned to her husband and said, I wonder if he heard me. At that moment, a fiery ant bit her leg. Jennifer took it as a sign from God that he had heard her loud and clear. Despite the horrific events caused by Dennis's actions, Jennifer faced yet another challenge in life. As a result of the trauma caused by Dennis, Jennifer almost lost the ability to conceive a child. However, amidst the darkness, there are shining examples of kindness, such as Dr. Craig Witz. After hearing Jennifer's story, he generously offered his services to her twice, free of charge. At the end of 2012, the couple welcomed their daughter, Jenna, and later their son, Jonah. It's like, thanks me, who would have thought they're really my happy ending. Although the criminal tried to silence her and take away her right to be a mother, he failed. Jennifer desires for her story to be shared, not for her own sake, but for others who have endured similar ordeals and must cope with them every day. She says, we've gone through something in life that we can talk about, but it's worth sharing it with others to instill hope. I hope this inspires you to use your voice to help someone else, Jennifer added at the end.
I am not a bit dumb, but instead notorious.